Piper was born into a family of detectives. When each member of the Starling family comes of age, coordinates appear on their wrists, leading them to their first case. It seemed unusual to Piper until she turned 16, and numbers directing her to Gibraltar Point Lighthouse appeared. She knew the story behind this lighthouse. Its first keeper, John Paul Radelmuller, had been murdered there in 1815 by local soldiers. As to why he had been murdered, there were two versions. One says John sold the soldiers diluted liquor, and when they found out they had been cheated, they went back for revenge. Another tells that he was serving the soldiers at his home, and when he decided to close the shop early, a deadly fight ensued. Nothing was concrete on how he met his true end, though it would make for one hell of a ghost story if it were haunted. Piper knew the murder from the 1800s wouldn't be what she was meant to solve. She hoped so, at least. That morning, she packed her hiking gear, got into her 1972 AMC Gremlin, and headed towards her destination. As for the curse, or gift, of the Starlings, Piper wasn't sure when it started, or why. Those who would know the answer aren't around anymore. Piper started out at the vast stretch of road ahead of her, listening to classic hits on the radio. Piper drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, then flicked the switch to turn right and onto a dirt road. Ahead of her was the lighthouse. She gazed at the looming building ahead of her. Piper felt the heavy weight of the situation heavily on her shoulders. Finding a safe place to park the car, Piper got out, grabbed her bag, and locked the car. She trudged up the path. It was overgrown, except for a few manicured hedges lining the way, winding up to the top. Here it was, Gibraltar Point Lighthouse. She was sure that in its heyday, this lighthouse was a remarkable sight. Now, it was no longer operational. Piper took a deep breath and exhaled, her eyes scanning over her surroundings. She needed to set up camp. So, Piper pushed open the heavy wooden door of the lighthouse and entered inside. It had been well preserved inside, showing it was well taken care of. Piper found a spot on the second floor and set up her pop-up tent. From here, she would be able to access the telescope to view what was all around her. Piper sat everything up and began her ascent up the stairs. On the balcony was a rusty telescope hanging on for dear life. Well, at least the lenses aren't broken, she thought to herself, lifting its neck and peering into it. Moving it around, Piper spotted something out of place. Someone had dug a trench in the back of the lighthouse. Curious, she grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. Her boots crunched on dead leaves underfoot as she made her way towards the trench. There, at the bottom of it, was a pile of bodies, all in various stages of decomposition. This was a serial killer's dumping ground. Piper needed to call the police. Reaching for her phone, she paused, hearing something being dragged along the ground. Turning off her flashlight, she hid behind an old oak tree. The source of the dragging came from an individual who was dragging a tightly wrapped body. Stopping at the edge of the trench, they used their foot to kick the heavy bundle into the trench. It bounced off one of the many others that were already lying at the bottom. A sickening squish and crunch echoed out of the hole. This had to be who was dumping bodies into the trench. Taking out a compact mirror Piper kept in her back pocket to fix her makeup, Piper angled the mirror so she could see the bank above the trench. Someone dressed in all black and a mask covering their face stood there, staring down into the trench before turning on their heel and walking away. It was at a time like this that Piper wished she had brought a proper weapon. The use of pepper spray and taser could give her time to run away, but not stun them long enough for authorities to arrive. Since she would be out here for a while, Piper needed to hatch a plan to immobilize this serial killer and have the police stationed close by to make the arrest. Her gut feeling told her that this was her first case. Something Piper would have to solve herself. Not hearing any more movement, she made her way back to the lighthouse and shut the door behind her. Tossing and turning in her sleeping bag, Piper stared up at the ceiling of her tent. She couldn't sleep. It was understandable. After all, there was a hole with dead bodies in the backyard of the lighthouse. Who could sleep with something like that in their backyard? Sitting up, Piper rubbed her face and yawned, crawling out of the tent. It's time for some coffee, since she won't be getting any sleep tonight. Waiting for the kettle to heat up on a mini gas stove, Piper shoveled a few spoonfuls of instant coffee and powdered creamer into a mug. When it whistled, she took it off and poured the water into her cup, flipping the off switch. Stirring the mixture, Piper blew on the steaming liquid before taking a sip. She walked up to one of the windows, gazing out of it. Down below, she saw an old trail leading somewhere out of sight. If Piper had to guess, it led to an old shed that stored tools, supplies, and firewood. A knock on the front door of the lighthouse startled her. Her heart jumped into her throat as she shakily put the coffee mug in her hands. As she shakily put down the coffee mug in her hands, Piper slowly walked over to a bag and took out her taser, slowly descending the stairs. She hid the device behind her back, slowly opening the door for a crack. Outside was a young man who was close to her age. He was dressed like he had just jumped out of an 80s grunge magazine. Scrunching her nose at his taste in clothing, Piper questioned him about what he was doing there. He simply replied that he had seen a light while following a trail close by. In other words, he was nosy as to who was there. Could this be the person who Piper witnessed dumping a body earlier? And just how many of those kills were his? He gripped the door, trying to pry it out of Piper's grasp, so she put her foot and weight against the door. Again, she questioned what he was doing there. His eyes darkened, and in a faint voice, he responded to her that he knew she had seen him. Seen what exactly? Piper played dumb, but she knew better. She just hoped that this individual would believe her. Loosening his grip on the door, he let go of it and stepped back. He watched Piper closely, hands in his pockets, his eyes dark and void of any emotion. He turned on his heel and walked down one of the trails next to the lighthouse. Sandy knew that he wasn't really gone, and that he was going around to the back. She would have to get there before he would. If Piper didn't, she was sure that he would break down the door. Somehow, she felt that this young man knew that Piper saw what he had been doing and was going to silence her. Quickly shuffling down the stairs, her heart hammered in her chest just as the back door burst open. Piper cursed under her breath. Where could she go from here? She had to think fast before he closed in on her. As the young man stepped into the lighthouse, Piper went right into the living room. Heavy, thudding footsteps followed behind her, getting close enough to grab her. He reached out to grab Piper when she remembered the taser in her pocket. Turning her body, she flipped the switch on. Aiming it at the young man, she pressed the button, jamming it under his ribs. The sound of crackling filled the air, and just as he was about to wrap his hands around her neck, his body jolted and shook, bringing him to his knees. Piper didn't pull the taser away, not until she knew he wouldn't be able to get up. Once he was down on the floor, she ran out the door, making a beeline for her car. Piper fumbled with the keys of the car and managed to open it, getting inside. Limping out of the house, the young man's arm was across his ribs as she started the engine and backed out of the driveway. Her foot accelerated on the gas, and she watched him using her rear view mirror. speeding out of the driveway like a bat out of hell. Piper fixed her eyes back on the road, knuckles white from her grip on the steering wheel. She needed to put distance between them until she got a few miles away to call the police and her family. Piper never realized a second figure in the back seat of her car, forgetting the most crucial rule she had been taught, that serial killers don't always work alone.